I think what I'll do, if you don't mind, numbers have just come out which are rather extraordinary, and I thought I'd play a tape of one of the people who I've respected over the years, from Joe Kiernan and Rick Santelli. This just came out, and we'll just play that for a second.
The last number is, of course, a very important number to this administration. This is the trade balance, which is a deficit, expecting minus 143 billion. Wow, it comes in much, much smaller, minus 87 billion. And now this follows a 163 that gets converted to 162 billion with a minus sign, the worst since record-keeping 1989. Then we cut it in half to 87.6. 87.6 would be the lightest, and I have to really go back. 87.6 would be the lightest since... wow, September of 23, SEP of 23. And this really does underscore how the movement of goods and services has really changed due to a variety of tariff-related issues. The income numbers, really, for the first 4 months of the year, they're stellar. They're really stellar. I mean, I could go back and look at the first 4 months of many different years. Really very strong numbers, and you're right. This administration is criticized for just about everything under the sun. I've never, ever in my lifetime had glimpses into the politics of an administration in the form of transparency like this one. Why don't we be, give credit where credit is due? Income really shooting up.
Rick, Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So once again, we got to talk about the economy. And the reason why we got to talk about the economy is because you have some of these banks and these institutions, like, for example, the Atlanta Fed, kind of walking back into their doomsday predictions that, a lot of these institutions were making when President Trump first started talking about doing the tariffs. And then he actually did the tariffs because he promised that he was going to do the tariffs. He did the tariffs, and then everybody was saying that the economy is going to collapse, right? The stock market is collapsing. Your 401k is wiped away forever, okay? These are the type of claims they were making, right? They said that we were going to see massive inflation, that store shelves were going to be empty, and we were headed towards a recession.
A 90% chance of a recession. That is the prediction tonight from a top economist, Torsten Slok, painting a dire picture of Trump's trade war and the implications, saying it's pushing the U.S. economy to the brink of full-blown crisis. He writes that in just weeks, quote, the consequence will be empty shelves in U.S. stores in a few weeks and COVID-like shortages for consumers and for firms using Chinese products as intermediate goods. And the administration tonight not giving much of a reassurance when pressed on this prediction.
Are you worried about empty shelves?
Not at present. We had some great retailers. I assume they pre-ordered.
My own mother, she's a senior administrative assistant about to retire. Much of her retirement is in her 401k. The 401ks of Americans have become 201ks because of Trump's recklessness. Congress is not helpless. We can take the power and tell the president you can't put a tariff on any country unless it goes through Congress. Republicans are starting to recognize that. We need to put more pressure on them. Town halls in their districts where they won't show up. Keep going to the streets. Keep marching.
Okay, now fast forward just 1 to 2 months now after President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, and all of a sudden, a lot of these people are walking back to doomsday predictions when it comes to the economy.
The April Consumer Price Index, a measure of inflation at the retail level, was released moments ago and showed that inflation essentially held steady. Let's start right there. What do these numbers tell us about inflation, where the economy is right now?
The good news is the economy, I think, is in a lot better of a place, honestly, than a lot of economists had expected at this point, especially given all of the conversations we've been having over the last several months about the impacts and almost psychological impacts that tariffs can create around buying things, people pulling things forward, spending more money to do certain things. That has not happened at the levels that I think had been anticipated. It could still happen, meaning some of that could filter out into maybe some data that comes next month or the month after. But this economy has been remarkably resilient and is really a demonstration of just how flexible the economy can be, and maybe even more flexible than some economists had been anticipating.
Okay, again, for example, the Atlanta Fed just put out a new bombshell prediction for GDP growth, real GDP growth in the second quarter of 2025, they now have it at 4.6%, okay, which is amazing, right? I mean, that is very, very, very good. I mean, the only way that you can pour cold water on this is if the actual number comes out to be like 4%, right? And then, MSNBC will come out here and say, well, Trump, there was only 4% GDP growth in the second quarter, right? This is what they'll say. But yeah, I mean, what is happening, okay, is that, you actually have people, companies, businesses that are investing in the United States of America, okay? There is a lot of investment. There is a ton of investment being poured into this country. And that is the exact opposite of what the mainstream liberal media told us that would happen, okay? As a result of President Trump's tariffs, they told us that nobody wants to do business in America anymore, right? Except, again, we're just not seeing any of this stuff in the actual numbers. And I think this is why CNN is now shocked, right? They're shocked and surprised that their new poll shows that the American people trust the Republicans more on the economy than the Democrats, right? CNN they just could not believe that the people trust the Republicans more when it comes to the economy than the Democrats. Take a look.
First 4 months of the Donald Trump presidency, that you expect that Democrats would have this massive lead on the economy. It ain't so. It ain't so. The party that is closest to your economic views, in November of 2023, it was the Republicans by 11 points. Now it's still within that range, still within that margin of error, plus 8-point advantage for the Republican Party. How is that possible, Democrats? How is that possible after all the recession fears, after the stock market's been doing all of this, after all the tariffs that Americans are against, and Republicans still hold an 8-point lead on the economy? Are you kidding me?
This is new CNN polling.
Yes.
How is that, when we look for trends, how is that trending with other data that you're pulling in?
Yeah, if it was just this one CNN poll, that would be one thing. But take a look at Reuters Ipsos. What do we see here? Party with a better economic plan. Well, in May of 2024, just before Donald Trump was reelected president, Republicans had a 9-point advantage. Look at where we are now in May of 2025. The advantage actually went up by 3 points. Now Republicans have a 12-point advantage when it comes to the party with a better economic plan. And again, this is after months of supposed economic uncertainty in which the stock market's been going bonkers, in which the tariff wars that Americans are against have been going on. And yet, despite all of that, the Democrats are down by 12 points on the economy. This speaks to Democratic problems on the economy better than basically anything that you could possibly look at. The Republicans still hold an advantage on the all-important key issue of the day, and that is the reason why, even if Donald Trump's approval ratings are a little bit lower than they used to be, Republicans are not out of the ballgame because they still have a clear advantage on the economy, whether you look at CNN's polls or whether you look at the Ipsos poll right here, in which they have a 12-point advantage on the economy, Kate.
And also in the CNN data, it does show that Republicans are gaining ground in an area that is key relating to all of this, which is when it comes to the middle class.
Yeah. Historically speaking, which is the party of the middle class, has been a huge advantage for Democrats. I have polling from NBC going all the way back since 1989 when Democrats had a 23-point advantage. 2016, a 17-point advantage. But by this decade, we already started seeing declines back in 2022 where you saw that Democrats led, but only by 4 points, well within the margin of error. And now in our latest CNN poll among registered voters, which is the party of the middle class, it is tied. This, I think, speaks to Democratic ills more than anything else. They have traditionally been the party of the middle class. No more. Donald Trump and the Republican Party have taken that mantle away, and now a key advantage for Democrats historically has gone adios amigos, and now there is no party that is the party of the middle class. Republicans have completely closed the gap, Kate.
All right. There's a lot of messages and a lot to be learned from these numbers and this data. It's good to see you, Harry.
Nice
Thank you so much. Still ahead for us, an athlete takes home.
Yeah, so I don't know about you guys, but I can never get enough of watching CNN be shocked and surprised that their propaganda didn't work. Oh, our propaganda didn't work, right? Telling people that their 401ks are gone didn't work, right? Telling people there's going to be hyperinflation didn't work. Telling people there's going to be a recession didn't work. Yeah, no, it didn't work, right? I'm sorry, it didn't work, okay? You were wrong once again, okay? But see, what these people don't realize is that when you're wrong over and over and over and over and over again, eventually, at some point, people say, hey, you know what? Maybe I should stop listening to these people, especially Democrats when it comes to the economy. Democrats cannot tell me anything about the economy. Socialists, progressives, communists cannot talk to me about the economy. I would never listen to any of these people when it comes to the economy, because these are the same people. When inflation was raging in this country, these are the same people who looked the American people in the eye and told them that the inflation that we were experiencing, okay, is transitory and that it would go away and that Joe Biden and the Democrats are going to fix it.
You know, now the White House has gone from claiming inflation is transitory to saying that they can fix inflation with more spending to inflation is a good thing. And now we have Biden blaming it on things like people buying more stuff and the COVID stimulus checks that his White House handed out. Liz, I'd like your reaction to what's happening here and what the Democrats are saying. Watch.
That these inflation rises will be transitory, that they will come back down next year.
Will settle down.
Transitory.
Transitory.
That inflation will come down next year.
This is going to be ease inflationary pressure, not increase it, ease inflationary pressure.
It will ease longer-term inflationary pressures.
This bill is going to ease inflationary pressures. Everything from a gallon of gas to a loaf of bread costs more. Do you ever think you'd be paying this much for a gallon of gas?
At this point, the committee, Federal Open Market Committee, is seeking inflation running moderately above 2% for some time. So the real question is, as we go through this, are we going to find ourselves in a situation where inflation expectations are de-anchored and inflation is moving up and is persistent? And I think we're all very, acquainted with the history of how we got into that situation in the 1970s. We did that in the 1960s, and we have no intention of repeating that. So central banks and the Fed learned how to keep the centrality of keeping inflation under control. We know how to do that. And that's just by not allowing the economy to just ignore constraints over time. But I think this is not a problem for this time as near as I can figure. And if it does turn out to be, then we do have the tools we need.
So Jay Powell's squaring off, should we say, to those that are worried about inflation risks here, but also those that are perhaps saying the stimulus is too much, there's froth in the markets. He's laser focused. We've got jobs to bring back.
Yeah, he was sanguine on the inflation worry here, and he said, look, it's not like we expect, he said, by no stretch of his imagination does he expect inflation to spike here in the near term. And this concern about big budget deficits and inflation, we've been hearing people warn about that for how many years now, and it hasn't come to fruition. So there's some sort of disconnect overall happening there. He said, while there are some bright spots in the economy near term, good news on progress on vaccinations, waves of fiscal stimulus to date that have kept some American families solvent at least.
Yeah, so again, is it really a surprise that the American people don't trust Democrats on the economy? I mean, come on. The American Destruction Plan definitely led to the inflation that we saw. The Inflation Reduction Act, a.k.a. the Lifestyle or the Standard of Living Reduction Act, really, definitely did not help out with inflation. It did not reduce inflation. In fact, it probably made inflation worse, to be honest with you. Almost every policy that Democrats passed was inflationary. And then they turned around and told us that it was imaginary, right? That inflation was going to go away and that the American people's sour feelings on the economy was just a vibe session, right? It's just your feelings, okay? You are just not feeling the right thing. And in fact, they're saying that now in response to this poll showing that the American people trust the Republicans more on the economy. They're now saying that, well, the American people's, their feelings are wrong, right? Your feelings are wrong to trust the Republicans more. I'm not making this up. Take a look.
The poll also asks which party best reflects their view on a range of issues. And when it comes to crime, the economy, immigration, Republicans still hold an advantage, although actually those numbers are starting to slip. How did you think about this poll as you were looking through?
I couldn't help but be reminded about a big problem in my part of the world, the econ part of the world. We can't get a clean read on how consumers feel about the economy because the data has been infected by partisanship, really in an unprecedented manner. So,
meaning your partisanship reflects whether or not you think the economy is good or not?
Do people think the economy is not doing well, or do they just not like who's in the White House? This is a huge problem right now, and it's making it impossible to get that clarity that economists like to see about how consumers are doing. Do they intend to spend? Makes it impossible to forecast.
Yeah, so now that the data isn't matching what they want, right? The propaganda didn't work. Now they're saying, well, I don't know. about the data, right? The data might be fake, right? It might be skewed. Okay, this is what they're saying, which, hey, I agree with that. I think the data is fake. I think that the data underestimates President Trump's support, right? I think that the data tends to be skewed in favor of Democrats, okay? But I think she's saying the exact opposite. It's just hilarious how these people operate, right? Just how overtly partisan these people are that claim to be so objective, right? Especially these so-called economists, okay, who tend to always side with the Democrats and liberals. But yet, again, look at the results, right? Look at the results. So that being said, let's actually discuss here very briefly the economic plan of the GOP, President Trump's big, beautiful bill. That's what he calls it. And I just want to go over some of the things that they're working on, they're currently negotiating over in Congress. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Along with FHN, their financial chief economist, Chris Lowe. Gentlemen, thanks a lot. So let's put up a checklist, because there were certain things that this was supposed to do, right? Obviously extend and make permanent the 2017 tax cuts. No problem there?
Looks good.
Looks good. Okay. Provide additional tax relief. Jake.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff is low-hanging fruit. Doesn't cost too much. Red meat for some of the constituencies. I think that's a check.
Do you like that?
I would say the one piece that probably would have been more expensive, no tax on Social Security, that didn't make the cut. Right. But yes, no tax on tips, it's in there.
Well, apparently, when it comes to the no tax on Social Security, they actually couldn't do that via reconciliation, right? That's the only reason it's not in there. So a lot of people have basically a misconception that, well, the GOP, Trump, they folded on that. They didn't really fold on it. They just couldn't do it through reconciliation, right? Because, again, it's Social Security. So, they got to go through a different process. They couldn't do it through reconciliation, so they decided to provide another form of tax relief to Social Security beneficiaries, right? So the only reason it's not there is because they literally can't do it through reconciliation.
No tax on overtime is in there, and there's some relief for seniors.
Stimulate economic growth. Should Wall Street be happy with the final product?
I think the CapEx provisions in here are actually pretty decent. Early expensing of structures in particular.
That goes hand in hand with the notion that, hey, we're going to bring factories back and on-site back.
And you look at the economy over the course of the last 3.5 years, anything outside of tech in the capital investment space has basically been in a recession. And so you're putting stimulus on the things that you can revive here. I think that's probably going to get through.
You agree, I guess, Chris, with that?
Yeah, and really beneficial, too, to small business, right? Because you're extending those provisions for small business as well. That is a big job creator in the U.S.
So is this the part, reducing federal spending and deficits? Should we start it with this? I mean, Jake, is this where it seems like there's a lot of arguing and finger pointing?
I'm not sure why, because the biggest reduction here on the Medicaid stuff is really a reversal of the emergency that you put on during COVID. You extended eligibility for a lot of people during the COVID emergency. We're spending $900 billion more than we were expected to on Medicaid. It's outpaced inflation. It's outpaced medical inflation. It's outpaced everything. So really, it's a rejigging back to something that looks more normal structurally. So I don't get the debate. I think the number is the right reduction. Again, it's going to run into some obstacles here.
Right. Yeah, because the government, politicians hate cutting the fat. Right, I mean, you got illegals on Medicaid, right, in these blue states, and Democrats boo-hoo, whine, and cried about the illegals losing health care, right, free health care. So again, this is why I try to tell you guys about these big government policies, right? This is why you can't sign up for this stuff, because once people own this stuff, you can't get off of it. It's like a drug, right, where they're fighting tooth and nail in order to get spending back to where it was before the pandemic, which should be a no-brainer. It should be a no-brainer to get spending back to where it was before the pandemic, right? But they can't even do that because, again, once people get hooked on the government, right, on these government programs, it's hard to get them off. But the honest to God truth is that we can't really afford this stuff. And running up the deficits and the debt is just not a good idea, especially if you're concerned about inflation, which really blows my mind. These people come out here and they boo-hoo, whine, and cry about inflation when it comes to tariffs, but tariffs aren't inflation, right? But what they actually really should be concerned about when it comes to inflation is the spending. But again, they don't really seem to be all that concerned about the spending and how that contributes to inflation. So again, it's just funny how that works. They're boo-hoo, whine, and crying about cuts, right? Mainly Democrats crying about cuts, but yet they're also complaining about inflation. It's like you can't complain about cuts and inflation at the same time. It doesn't make sense. You're not arguing in good faith, right? That's what that shows.
Right. And then remember, too, that there is revenue already from tariffs. And even if the tariffs stay at around 12% where they are now, that's another $2.3 trillion over 10 years that doesn't count in the CBO accounting in the budget.
How does that work, though? Okay, it doesn't count with the CBO. I mean, I guess when these politicians go out, how do they? I mean, does it count? Like when you do your work, Jake, for instance, how do how do we know what the deficit is? What number do we use if the CBO won't use the number?
Sure. I mean, I think the problem with tariffs is, and if we stayed right here today, 10% kind of across the board, we don't get the kind of relapse when the 90-day pause expires, et cetera. You're still going to have substitution effects that get you down from that sort of 12% effective rate. So it's really hard to say, hey, we're going to generate $200 billion more a year on a persistent basis. I think you could start your baseline that way, but the reality is you never end up there. And so I think it's a number that's kind of fraught.
I do think, though, if you're out talking to people and trying to put it into perspective, you start with the fact that deficit's been close to $2 trillion for 3 years, that it was 6.5% of GDP last year. Anything over 5% is not sustainable. So does this take you closer to 5? I think it does. But to Jake's point, it's not going to take you all the way there.
Advance key policy priorities. There's a lot of things in here, that maybe not normally would be in a budget. Like pushing back on the courts, right? I mean, should that be in there? As an economic purist, Chris, should that be in there for you?
Well, I would have liked to see some of the stuff that DOJ found written into the bill, and it doesn't look like anything made it there. Maybe the Senate fixes some of it. But, it's really hard to make cuts, for example, administratively. It would be nice to have the legislature get behind it.
Is that just a function of politics? It's easier, President Trump campaigned on one thing. These folks who are in D.C. want to be there forever.
And it's part of the deal-making process, right? It's really hard to advance, super partisan policy priorities, I think, in a big spending bill like this. So
AKA, like I told you guys, it's hard to cut, right? It's hard to cut from the government. Again, once you spend, okay, it is hard to cut because the politicians are hooked on money that we don't have, right? Spending money that we don't have, spending our taxpayer dollars and, creating these fake jobs, right? Having a bloated government, having people be on welfare, people who don't contribute to the system benefiting, right, from our tax dollars. Yeah, they love that because those people vote for them, right? Mainly they vote Democrat, right? So again, when you have those people hooked on the government and they vote for the politicians and the politicians have to continue to get reelected, yeah, they don't want to codify DOJ cuts, right? They don't want to actually cut the spending that needs to be cut in order to take care of the deficit and to, eventually, hopefully reduce the debt, which again, never is going to happen really. But still, I'm just saying that they don't want to do stuff like that. Okay, they don't want to do it because it's too painful, right? It's too painful. It could cost them their reelections, right? It could cost them their jobs because, again, when you do stuff like that, when you live high off the hog, right? When you spend more than you take in, and then you have to rate it back in, yeah, people don't like that, right? They don't like having the government money taken away from them. And again, this is why it's so hard to make the cuts, right? But they still need to be made. And, politicians have to be held accountable. The GOP has to be held accountable if they do not codify these DOJ cuts into law, right? Because I think that's at the very least what they can do. It's not really that much. They should be able to do that, but they're struggling to do it because, again, it's just really hard in Washington, D.C. to cut government spending. But regardless, the key priorities that President Trump laid out are in the bill for the most part. I just wish they would cut spending more. But hey, at least we're not dealing with Kamala Harris, right? Because under Kamala Harris, it would have been tax and spend more, right? It would have been tax and spend more. It would not have been tax cuts. It would have been more welfare, okay, more handouts. And, they would have really just kind of blown things out when it comes to the spending. And, hey, I wish there were more cuts in this bill, right? I wish they would reduce spending even more. But, hey, at least the tax cuts are there, right? And, they are cutting some spending. We will see what the final bill looks like, what the final numbers look like. It's basically impossible to really say until we actually see the final thing. But it is objectively better than what we would have got under Kamala Harris, okay, and Democrats. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.